I want to say the first thing we saw of theirs was an apple juice commercial that they'd done in Thailand, but the style was really interesting. It had like a 3D. Was it 2D for 3D? We always get it backwards.
Yeah, 2D backgrounds and 3D
3D
characters, basically.
Yeah. And it was something that we saw and thought, oh, this kind of matches what we're hoping to achieve with this game we're going to make. And we talked to a lot of animation houses.
All the ones in the US, a bunch of famous ones abroad. And yeah, most of them were telling us, like, on this budget, this style, like, it's not going to work. Like, you should just make it like Rick and Morty, or make it like, something 2D, something like Archer. And that's kind of all the advice we were getting from folks. And we just we're like, we don't want to, though. So how do we not?
Hello and welcome to the Game Developer Podcast. I'm your host, Senior Editor Bryant Francis. Apparently, we're all suffering from something called superhero fatigue, but don't tell the team at Adhoc Studio that. The developers of superhero workplace comedy Dispatch are riding sky high after a marvelous debut. But behind the scenes, they weren't always so invincible. According to Bloomberg News, the studio spent the last year scrambling for funds to finish the game, a story so familiar by now in the game industry, you think it would involve Bruce Wayne's parents dying in Crime Alley. Despite all that, the game is a bona fide hit. Now, you can talk all you want about the episodic release schedules, overcoming funding woes, but none of that makes for a great game. Today, I'm joined by Dispatch co-directors Nick Herman and Dennis Lenart to talk about great narrative design, their collaboration with Igloo Studio, and the tall task of making your game's opening moments. And Nick and Dennis, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Let's talk Dispatch. This game is really cool. I think I'll say the first thing that surprised me when I saw the game was announced, when I picked it up, there were a bunch of things that automatically told me there was going to be some quality. You guys are from the old Wolf Among Us crew. Slap X Telltale and a lot of things that can mean a lot of things, but you guys had a good pedigree. Gritty superheroes are a strange phenomenon for me personally, because I've never been attracted to that genre. When I first heard about The Boys, Invincible, I wasn't personally like, okay, I'm just like, I feel like I can just go read Marvel and DC. But you guys have proven, again, that people really want this. Why do you think people want these like alternative superhero universes that have more blood and sex than the big two?
I mean, I wouldn't use gritty to really describe Dispatch, but I see I get why we get compared to things like Invincible and The Boys. Weirdly, I think what Dispatch kind of offers is more of an optimistic, as much as we're dealing with, maybe people who are not so, who don't seem like they're worth redeeming. I think that's kind of the point, is trying to find the good in everybody and trying to figure out kind of what actually makes a hero versus just, a mech suit. So yeah, I don't know. I think story or superheroes are a genre, not necessarily a or what am I trying to say? Like, I think there's just a lot of different types of stories you can tell. It's more of like a setting, I guess, than it is like something that is very narrow. And we're just trying to, along with all these other great IPs, trying to explore like what's possible there.
Yeah, I think also, with the, say, like the brutality or something, the way we always approach things is the scenes we're excited about are the four people in a room having a dramatic conversation about something around a table. Like, that's the stuff that we're in it for. And then all of the other pieces, like, the violence of the gratuity, whatever, like, kind of those things come in later. Like, that's like flavoring on top, as opposed to, maybe some,
it's not the starter fuel.
Come out and just say, yeah, it's like, that's like, this is what we're here for. And then we'll retrofit some other stuff to it. It's like, we're in for the other stuff. And then those just come out of sitting in a room and talking about it and going, it'd be funny if, or wouldn't it be crazy if, and,
Yeah. Speaking of four people sitting in a room and that being exciting, when I was playing this game, comparing to some of your old output at Telltale, I was impressed by the animation generally. And I was impressed by how you guys were able to show, have more expressive animation, more physical contact. These are things that, in my understanding, because the old Telltale games, players had to navigate a character through the world, game animation and like conversational animation don't always line up. Under the hood, what were some of the decisions made that helped you guys from a technical perspective, like open up what you could do emotionally with the characters so they could have, you know, those four people in a room and make it be really about the performance, about the character, about the actor? Like, how did you sort of improve that from your last days at Telltale?
I'll say one piece is because, say games we worked on in the past at Telltale had a pretty quick turnaround time. Like we were making those episodes live, and episode 1 would come out while we're working on an episode 2 to try and get that out of the door while we're trying to work on episode 3. So you kind of, you had the script and then you just dove right into making something that would be the final shippable thing. When we approached Dispatch, we knew that performance and the sort of animation quality was something that we really wanted to focus on. And we basically tried to mimic more of an animated film or TV pipeline where we started with, scripts that went into storyboards, that went into an animatic, where we basically put those storyboards into an edit and then do scratch voice over top. So you're kind of get more time to build these performances from the ground up. And so you're seeing, there's scenes in, say, episode 1 that we've been seeing for 2 years now, in just all different phases as it's slowly going through. And so you're allowed to kind of find more and more nuance in every different part of the process. Whereas before we were part of it was just a race for time of how can I get this done on time? That was the main goal.
And then to finalize this scene, take it from nothing to final.
Exactly. Yeah. There's 28 minutes of stuff here.
Yeah. Sometimes there is an argument that restrictions are sometimes what makes great art in different ways, but it feels like those 3 big timelines. One, look, you guys did some impressive stuff across those games, but 2, it sounds like that 3 weeks was never as enabling as the process you had here.
Yeah, I mean, Telltale and all those games walked so we could run. I think they kind of proved out the episodic thing, and to do that, they felt early on that you need time between each episode to react to how the player base is sort of consuming the content, what they're thinking, are certain plot lines resonating? Do we want to build on that? Do we want to kind of collapse that back down into something else? And I think really because we have so much experience doing that, we felt much more comfortable taking some of these things away and saying, okay, we're not going to have the luxury of, after episode 1 launches, being able to see what people being able to adjust for episode 2. We kind of just need to get it 90% of the way there on our first try. And so a lot of our we didn't just do that without any safety nets. We've been playtesting scripts since we had scripts, so you could basically read and click and make choices, and it would sort of branch there. We made an animatic that was, basically a fully playable game, but in storyboard form with voice and sound and music that we would then take to people and test that, make adjustments, and so we had to develop a new process on how we did this, but we still had the same goals and things that we needed to get from that process. Is just a little bit different. And essentially what it meant was we were making an animated television show at the same time that we were making a video game. So we kind of it was in a lot of ways double the effort than it normally was, but it allowed us to be really iterative on the gameplay side. And then essentially at a certain point, once your animatics are done, that goes into a waterfall, a very typical waterfall animation pipeline where changing anything is kind of harder the deeper you go, and it's costs more, and no one wants to do it. So we had to change up how we worked, but it allowed us to have the fidelity that you're responding to, Brian, and it gave us afforded us things that a normal game couldn't do. Things like people taking clothes off or changing, all this stuff was touching each other, and things that no one ever wants to do in game animation is less of a problem in a television and
Yeah. And also, it was like 2 years ago, we were identifying, hey, this is going to be a thing. He's going to take his mask off here. And everyone knew it was planned for. There was a long process, So, yeah, as opposed to, like you're saying, at Telltale, it was much more of a, hey, we're shipping this thing in 5 days. Hey, I have a crazy idea. What if he takes off his jacket here? It's
then
just
you
a
just get
non-starter.
fired if you say that at Telltale. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But the the process, obviously, the Telltale process does afford you more flexibility right down to the wire. You can make huge changes, tons of rewrites, all sorts of stuff. And so I think in order to mitigate that, we, like Nick was saying, we put a lot of time and effort into playtesting our scripts and all the branching paths with different people. And then we play tested the entire playable season of just animatics, so like playable storyboard version of everything. And like we've been iterating the whole time kind of because we knew we weren't going to have that last minute flexibility of, oh, we screwed this up. How are we going to fix this now with 3 days left? Yeah. It's like we had to make all those mistakes early.
Yeah. Do you guys feel like, and I asked because I've been talking to a lot of devs about this. I just did it on a recent story I did about, like quote unquote, what slows down game development. I've talked to a lot of devs who've sort of felt struggles on different games about having to throw out content because of directional changes. And sometimes that's just the nature of the beast. Sometimes I recall a story about Sunset Overdrive where they just had to throw out all their work on the city because the fun of the game was somewhere else. Do you guys feel like you did a good job not throwing out work? It sounds like because you were working early, you were able to keep content locked and not have to throw things out. But did you feel like there were any places you did really well on that? Could have done better? Like, how did you feel about that?
I mean, we definitely cut stuff out. Yeah, I mean, in different phases too. We cut stuff in the script phase. We cut stuff that was fully, animatic. We had voice. Some of that was like sort of like direction and like high level decisions of like, hey, this scene works better without this piece. Like, there's a piece in episode 7 that's really dramatic. There used to be like a little bit of like a jokey beat after it, but it was kind of like it almost felt a little bit like insecure, like we're not sure if you're gonna take this seriously, so here are some jokes. And I think once we got far enough into the process, it was like, no, this is better if we just let this sort of sit with the player. Yeah. And then there's like literal, scoping. Like, hey, we're over budget, we're running out of time, we gotta pull. We pulled probably like 15 minutes out of the finale of episode 8, just purely like a lot of cool stuff, a lot of great ideas, but it's just like we don't have the time to produce it.
Yeah, infamously recently, I think people have really glommed onto, I think it was Pierre who said something about like, we didn't realize people would want those sex scenes so much. And
it's less that. It was less that we didn't realize people would want it. I think he was being like maybe cavalier or funny about it, but like it was mainly a content scoping thing. It was, hey, there's this, we have this beat, it's really cool, it's great, but it doesn't really move the plot forward, and like we're at a point where like every minute was precious, and so we had to kind of make the hard decision to pull a scene that people would have loved, but those are the decisions you have to make, and maybe there's opportunities in the future for us to kind of show that stuff.
Yeah. What's the difference between a scene that doesn't move the plot forward and there's I'm being mean to Tumblr when I say this, because Tumblr is now one of your guys' greatest like fan hubs, and I don't want it. Tumblr people, I love you, please don't come after me. But like there's the it's the weird internet quote of like, I try not to give people too much guff about this, where they're like, oh, I don't like that this thing has nudity or this thing has sex, it doesn't move the plot forward. What do you think is the difference between those two sentiments? Because I can picture it in my head, but for people who aren't as experienced with writing, or maybe those two it's harder to parse those two things. How would you define that?
I mean, we're actually not for just giving that quote that I hope it doesn't get fucking spread everywhere about plot. Like, we're pretty plot. We care less about plot than most people, I think, as a studio.
Sure, yeah.
We're very character focused, and we're very like relationship, and like honestly just like our games are more about like playable relationships than they are like playable plots. Like, I think people will give us a lot of critique that we don't have as many endings as Detroit Become Human or something like that. Like, it's not our focus. We know it's important, and we know that we need to have the branching and all that stuff, but we really care about how you feel about the characters and the relationships and have ownership over that stuff. So
yeah,
So yeah, I mean, I guess it's like we know that no one cares about dispatch if they don't care about these people, and there is a level of horniness in our game that we knew was there. It's not a surprise that people are feeling the way they feel. It's just a balance, you know. It. I think at the end of episode 4 when it debuted, we had that week gap before episode 5 hit. I think I was really nervous because all anyone was talking about was like romantic stuff and relationship stuff. And all they were predicting that was going to happen next was romance driven or like payoffs, you know, now we're going to have this, you know, sexy time with this person or yada yada. I'm just sitting there like, well, there is a story we're trying to tell. There are other things that happen, other characters. I hope you like that stuff too. So it's certainly, we had a bigger reaction to it than I think we were anticipating. I'll say that.
Yeah. Hey, it's exciting. I don't know. People find what they latch on to. Speaking of quote unquote limited endings, quote unquote, like, you know, it's obviously branching. We're speaking about branching. What was the central theory behind how the different choices in a dialogue scene play out? Like, you have other games that make very clear hard lines about the different tones, you know, nice, neutral, mean. You have some more character motivated stuff that can drive things out, like what is my character's background, like would they organically have this kind of response. I'm in this state when I'm playing where I can both feel a difference between the line choices, and yet I don't feel a clear identity shift for your protagonist, for Robert Cubed, as I just popped into my head. I guess, what motivates those different things? Like, how do you sort of say these are the 3 distinct choices we want to give a player in a line of dialogue?
I think it's really organic. A lot of it is just, you know, like I would say one of the things that makes a good script is feeling like putting yourself in that moment in a scene and thinking, what would I say here? What different things could I say? As opposed to, say, coming at it from a pure design angle where you're just thinking like, okay, what's the angry response? What's the one that's really funny? What's the one that's gonna, you know, win the person over? And that was just a lesson we took from Telltale as well, as, you know, the things that people responded most to were the gray areas and the flavors of conversation as you're going. And it sort of creates a version of the other characters in your mind and what that relationship is. And I think if you have a meter on screen, you're just looking to game the system, and it kind of makes the people less like real characters or, you know, real human beings, and just makes them puppets that you're playing with, like toys. So I think there's also something nice about the gray area of options where a lot of people, you know, sometimes we might see a spread of 3 choices where a couple of them feel a little bit similar. You always try to give people different options, different flavors, but sometimes people go really hard in one direction, or they think something is like, this is the right thing. Like, this is what you have to stay here to motivate the team. And sometimes, you know, that might have the opposite effect. And that's just kind of the messy nature of reality. I don't think anyone can really, you know, especially with a team of, you know, folks like we have in the Z team, where there's just a bunch of people from various backgrounds who bring a bunch of drama and baggage to the table. Like, you're feeling them out throughout the story as well. So we don't want it to feel like you can just predict what's going to happen.
And I think too, it's important to say that, like, there's kind of 2 other factors that pop into my head when I think about this. It's like, we're making a piece of entertainment. So we need to make sure that the choices are entertaining. And whether that's, you know, entertaining in a sad way, like, it's a piece of media. So you know, to write a good scene is hard. To write 3 good scenes, or to write, you know, when someone's supposed to be witty, it's hard to be witty, and like, you have to do that multiple times, and like sometimes like that's a limitation, is like, what are the kind of like things that we can do here. But also, Robert is a person who, there's a band of things that he would actually do in any given moment, and it's, you know, it's not true to the character to just be like, oh, in this moment Robert like punches someone in the, you know, punches Mandy in the face, or you know, whatever, Invisigal in the face, and like, it's like he would never do that. So we can't give you that option, even if that's what you're screaming at your screen, because you're not Robert, you know? So there's a little bit of that we have to kind of walk, where this isn't like a build your own character. It's you're taking over this individual, and your Robert is going to be different than someone else's Robert, but it's kind of like there's some bumper bowling happening here.
Yeah, and you're kind of walking through the instinct, right, of like, it is a very human experience to, when you're given an opportunity to say something, or given even like the smallest choice of what you do in a room, there may be 2, 3 or more things floating through your head, right? Like, and then you follow those instincts. In the real world, we do it so much faster, and in a game, like, you're giving players the opportunity to think more about
time
those
slows down a little bit. It'll allowing you to figure that out. Yeah, and if Pierre were here, he'd probably say that like a lot of the choices are the things that when you're in the moment yourself in real life, something happens to you, and then you say something dumb, and then you go home and you're in the shower, and then you're like, oh my God, I should have said this. You know, that's kind of what all those choices always are. Like, can we give people the opportunity to feel smart, to feel clever, to feel funny?
My spouse likes to make fun of me whenever I go, oh, I came up with the perfect quip, and I don't know what thing they're quoting, but when my spouse goes like, oh, the jerk store called, God, it might be The Office, it might be Parks and Rec, it's one of those things, but like whenever I come up with that, Carly just goes, the jerk store called. And in your game, unless you deliberately script a moment like that where you know, Robert's having the same conversation with someone and they make fun of him for it, they don't suffer from that, right? Like that's a power fanny of its own kind, to be able to say something relevant when in real life you're scrambling.
Yeah, I think the audience has responded to how kind of like, I mean, there's Robert's kind of oozing riz is the thing that we see. Like, everyone he talks to, doesn't matter, you know, man, woman, like everyone kind of falls under his spell. And he, you know, people are kind of like celebrating the like that he's a main character who you actually want to be. So that's a win, I think. That's hard to do. Normally it's that your favorite characters are the people like who aren't the main character, you know? And a lot of people's favorite is Robert, so that's cool.
Your Garrus Vicarian instead of your Shepherd per se.
100%.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll also add too, with branching and sort of the dialogue options, like, granted, they're superheroes. They're in this weird world of a dispatch center office. Everyone has powers where they could burn someone else alive if they wanted to. But at the end of the day, like, we're also trying to mimic real conversation. And so we don't also want to give you choices. You know, it's not like in every scene you could be like, I'm going to, tip the desk over and walk out. And it's like in normal life, that doesn't happen that often. Like, you're at work, someone might say something kind of crappy to you. You're not usually going to just stand up and throw a desk over, so it's like we always have to fight the urge on those too, because there's some times where you feel like the character is being, disrespected in a moment. You have to choose, okay, as Robert, when would he lay down the law versus when would he, know that he's got to make it through the day and be professional, and sort of like we give the player as much sort of guidance as we can in there, like a possibility space to kind of explore that without just giving them nuclear options all the time. Because then it would just feel like a cartoon, people bouncing off the walls.
Yeah. I'd like to pivot to a very specific moment in the game, and whatever you're thinking at home, dear listener, it's not going to be the moment you're thinking about, which is the very first scene, not the fight in the warehouse, but the interrogation scene. I was really impressed by that. We hear all the time in games that the first hour of a game, the first 20 minutes, the first 5 minutes, 30 seconds are really hard because you're trying to keep your audience attention span. You guys open on a shot of Robert, half in shadow, flat against the back. There's no establishing shot. There's no big thing. And it's a slow, small conversation where like the visual and narrative details, bleed, drip feed out. How did you guys approach that scene? Like, can you tell me about some of your like thinking going into it and why you made that the first scene instead of doing something more of like a TV show cold open where we jump to Robert in the warehouse, I guess?
Well, that scene was written a little bit later, so we came back to episode 1 and added that scene. Initially, I do believe the kind of like first idea thing was that we started. It was a different opening action scene, but it was we kind of started in the middle of that and like introduced Robert in the suit. We added that. That was a deliberate ad from a kind of plot standpoint, just to kind of seed Dad died at the hands of this bad guy, right? Because we didn't have a lot of places in the story where it made sense to do that outside of the very top, so we wanted to kind of get that in early, and that idea, or that sort of need from a narrative standpoint, smashed up with an idea that we had that on Batman at Telltale, where we were going to open on a slow shot of pushing in on young Bruce Wayne, like boy Bruce Wayne lying in the snow, and then a slow like red trickle would come down his nose, and it was going to be in like black and white. And we had this idea that we were really excited about, they didn't use, and so we've always had this in our back pocket, and we were like, okay, let's fucking use it here. So that's, I don't know, Dennis, if there's anything else you can think of.
Yeah, no, I mean, just that. What was interesting is, because you're right, it's like the idea had existed before. A lot of those details were just in the script too, so it was helpful to have people be able to read the scene, understand, why is Robert's floor concrete? Oh, I guess he has the carpet rolled up against the side. Like there's a lot of like details that make that work. That sort of the art department and everyone kind of needed to wrap their heads around. So yeah, that was definitely one of those like kind of complete package seeds that was pretty. It was pretty great from the start.
It was also an opportunity for us to, not that opening shot, but Dennis and I both love Unbreakable, the film, which is about superheroes, and there's a curtain shot in that movie that we love, and then we basically just ripped it and put it in here.
Yeah, something I loved about that scene was it's established eventually he's lying on the floor. He's lying on the floor, but when I first saw the shot, I read it as he was leaning up against a wall in shadow, because that's sort of a classic noir intro, right? Like kind of how a character's introduced. But then the subtle details, like the blood flowing down the nose and then his dog coming in, that was so cool. Like I love the way that shot like reoriented you spatially in the scene, and across movies or animation or games, I haven't seen one. There's a bunch of shots like it, I guess. Like I don't want to like put this on a pedestal per se, but I just love how just the act of confusing me a little bit about what perspective I was looking at, like that did as much to hook me in as an exciting, action-filled cold open would. Like I thought that was a pretty effective technique.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's great. It was basically that we knew that we were already on the page. The expectation was a little bit confusing because it sounds like he's in a therapy session initially. So we wanted to mirror that confusion. And as you're sort of realizing something's wrong here from the dialogue, you're seeing it visually as well without just cutting to a guy tied into a chair. So glad it worked.
Yeah, no, and it's nice too when you can get all departments on board to kind of like push behind a single idea. Like that was one of those where, like with the lighting, the intention was to make it feel like it is, a street light or something outside. He's leaning against a wall. But then we have to justify how that works in Robert's apartment. So then you have lots of meetings about like, okay, where's the light coming from? Is it the door open? Like, and then you end up changing the environment pieces to sort of suit the setup of what you need. It's like, that's probably, I was going to say, more than most shots probably in the entire season. That one was crafted with like a lot of things were crafted about Robert and his apartment in order to make
also that shot looked really bad for a long time, because it's just basically Robert's like this, and we're like, is this gonna look good? Like when it's not lit, when it's not fully animated, it looks pretty rough. But yeah, I mean, and we Dennis and I haven't really talked about kind of this piece, but that instinct and the way kind of that scene is cut and shot, we. In the first two episodes, we actually kind of were really pushing to have longer shots, longer takes, really lean on character performance and animation, and like, let's shoot this like we're shooting a HBO drama instead of like quick cuts all the time and like coverage and all this stuff. And you'll kind of, I don't know if anyone noticed this, but once we get to episode 3, we had to drop it, because it was so hard for our animation team to essentially not just like, hey, we're just going to hold this shot. And you see it in the bar a little bit too in episode 1, like on Blazer and Robert, we're just holding shots for like 15 to 25 seconds. And that is so much more difficult from an animation standpoint than it is if we're cutting every 3 to 6. So we had to kind of change. So you kind of feel the show or the game kind of change its style a little bit, I think, but it allowed for that opening shot to be effective, I guess.
Yeah, it's also one of those things too where just stylistically I think both Nick and I tend to prefer like planned out cinematography. That probably comes from our our upbringing as cinematic artists. And I think there's been a tendency in recent years with kind of the rise of motion capture and everyone just performing things on a volume. And it's cool. And in the right circumstances, it's amazing and you get really great stuff. But it always has kind of the like a little bit of an improv feel to it a lot of times. Where it's like yeah, it's the afterthought. And I think especially because the visual styling of this was more towards an animation or anime even, like where people really put a lot of thought into why the certain elements are in a frame and how a shot is going to cut together with three other shots. And it's much more planned. I think exactly. Yeah. That was something that I think allowed us in the animatic phase. Like it was one of the benefits of doing it the way we did, is not just so we could achieve a higher quality in the animation at the end, but also it kind of like forced us and our storyboard artists and everyone to sit down and really, you have the time to noodle through every shot and change something and throw it out and then move the characters across the room and try, resetting the blocking. And it feels, I don't know, it's a lot of our films. I think our favorite films are probably things that people storyboard out or like really think through shots. So yeah, it was exciting to get that opportunity and having a pipeline that allowed us to.
Yeah, to sort of compare it to a process you guys didn't do. I'm thinking of a long time ago, first learning about, how they film the Avatar movies and trying to build, they're building a production pipeline where they have actors on a stage. There are 30 camera operators around them or whatever, like capturing as much as possible that goes into that rough render, whatever, on the monitor that they're watching. And then they come back in later and the scene is rolling and they grab shots sort of based on the performance. And that's one real interesting way to do it. But you do sacrifice even, say, like the ability for an actor to and you can do this in animation too, is like when you know sort of what that storyboarded shot is, the actor can know how to move their body relative to where the boundaries of the frame are. They know what emotion to give. In your case, your artists, your animators can sort of know like, okay, this thing's back here, and it's not, like in the motion capture world, it's not sort of just like raw data that's brought in and then it cleaned up by animators later.
That's like a lot of, in the mocap stuff, it's like feels like black box theater where they're just like in a volume, moving around, talking to each other, doing stuff, and then you're kind of watching performances, and like they can give great performances, but then later you're stuck with that, and you're like, I wish they had why did they do it here? Why didn't they cross across the volume? So it's pros and cons. It takes way longer to do it our way, like so it's harder and longer. So I kind of see the value of that, but
yeah, and there's definitely it's like looking at something like Last of Us 2 or whatever, it's like you can have a style that really supports that and make amazing stuff. But I think it's basically just become like a production technique. I think sometimes the decision is made agnostic of what the actual content is you're making. It's just, oh, this is how we do things now. And it doesn't matter what style you're trying to achieve. Here's the tools you're going to use to do that. And so, it was nice for us to be able to say, well, this is our game now. We're not working for anyone else. This is how we think it should be done for this IP specifically. So let's just do it.
Yeah. Let's talk about the animators for a second. Because one, that whole team, everyone did such an amazing job on this game. Two, I believe you had support from an external animation studio, right? I'm sort of blanking on the name for it. What was it again? Yep. If you can help me out?
Igloo, yeah.
Igloo
Animation.
Yeah. There's been really interesting conversations about in the game industry about, not so much who deserves credit, but I guess how do we acknowledge and recognize the work of when, an external team like that can come in and help. So can you sort of talk through how you built this relationship with Igloo and what sort of worked well about having this external team of animators do it? And I also sort of know that you talked about these animation industry pipelines, but outsourced animation is in one way or another, what drives, your favorite TV shows, your favorite movies. Like, so you guys really, did like have to learn the lessons of another industry here, I gather. Like, what was that sort of like? Like, what was that like? I guess is where I'll end the question.
Yeah. I mean, I have some thoughts I don't know if you want to jump in. I feel like I just talked a bunch, but yeah, I think we saw, I want to say the first thing we saw of theirs was an apple juice commercial that they'd done in Thailand, but the style was really interesting. It had like a 3D, was it 2D for 3D? We always get it backwards.
Yeah, 2D backgrounds and 3D characters, basically.
Yeah. And it was something that we saw and thought, oh, this kind of matches what we're hoping to achieve with this game we're going to make. And we talked to a lot of animation houses.
All the ones in the US, a bunch of famous ones abroad. And yeah, most of them were telling us like, on this budget, this style, like it's not going to work. Like you should just make it like Rick and Morty, or make it like, something 2D, something like Archer. And that's kind of all the advice we were getting from folks. And we just we're like, we don't want to though. So how do we not?
We're like, how are you going to get the detail, the subtlety we need in some of these performances to really sell the comedy and the drama? So it was one of those things where they were, we had some different houses do some tests and sort of show how they would approach building the characters. And Igloo did a test that we were really impressed by. And, I don't think they'd realized what they were getting into at the time. And we were sort of, I don't know, I guess maybe that's when they should have run seeing our quality bar. And we did tons of iterations on just this little test clip, trying to get it to a spot that we felt was good for the game. And then, it was just okay, cool. How do we do X amount of hours of this footage now? And they were great and troopers and scaled up and sort of tried to show us their process, and we showed them what our process was and how we felt things needed to work. And when we sort of found a compromise in the middle. And it's definitely, we've worked with outsourcing on previous projects at previous studios, and there's like outsourcing where you just put together a package and kind of kick it over the wall, and then people do stuff and send it back. And we from the beginning were kind of saying like, yeah, this is it's like they sat next to us, except they also just happened to be far away from us. So Nick and I's job for a year and a half was just pure animation reviews for hours and hours a day, giving really detailed notes, talking to them like they were in the room. Like we really tried to, as much as possible, just make it feel like, again, we were thinking about it like our animation partners. That's how we talk about them, as opposed to outsourcing. And we were, love hearing all their ideas. We had a bunch of stuff that we were throwing their way, and it was just every scene, every moment. If you look at just any scene in that game, even if it's just two people talking, like the actual work required to do that was months just for that scene. So everything was always in production, overlapping. There's always like 10 scenes going on at the same time. And then Nick and I were just bouncing around between all of the different shots and trying to make sure that everything was kind of coherent. And
it was definitely challenging though. They hadn't done anything like this. We hadn't done anything like this. So we were learning a lot together. They had to learn how to make something interactive. They'd only ever done traditional linear stuff, but that was the appeal, is we wanted to work with a team that knew more traditional linear animation pipelines, and then we would teach them what we needed to teach them. They'd teach us what we needed to learn. And but the biggest challenge was our bar is really high, and we have incredible art director, we have a great animation director, or I'll say incredible animation director. Made it sound like I was putting him on a lower pedestal. And so that was, I think, the biggest thing for them. And I think they probably wish we would just have let them get away with more. But I think now that we can see it all, and everyone else can see it, I think everyone understands that it was worth the work.
Yeah. No, and they were troopers along the way. I think it's, like I was mentioning with the test, that there's probably I think they maybe thought that we were going to put more emphasis in that test that we originally did. But in our mind, that was like, oh no, this is just how the whole production process is going to go. Like, this is how we get to where we need. And I think partly initially we thought we could kind of get away with it with just Nick and I, killing ourselves. And then we pretty quickly realized we needed some more help and brought in Aniket, who's our internal animation director on our side, to the studio. Because we're like, look, there's also things that we at times, like Nick and I can't draw.
We aren't animators. I need you to communicate these ideas. These
exactly. Yeah. So it's like having someone who lives nearby, who we can just sit down with, talk through like really intense details of a shot, of really subtle facial performance, and then he can go away and like draw over certain poses to try and make sure we're hitting it. It's really just the same way you would approach a animated television show or film. But yeah, so I mean, we really did think of them for, however long it was, however many years, as just an internal part of us who just happened to not be right in the area.
Yeah. So. You said something in there about, like you joked and I want to make 100% clear. I interpret it as a joke, like where you said, oh, I bet they wish, we had just been a little bit more like, fire and forget per se, but I feel like fire and forget is sometimes what you get out of like an outsourcing relationship, right? Where you're sort of just saying like, hey, I don't really care as much about this, but I need all these assets for my game. So, hey guys, here's some money. Can you just fill in this hole for me so we can go focus on this? Which, like, again, pros and cons, that works in some productions, but like that's kind of the difference between outsourcing and co-dev, right? Is like sometimes these are people you trust enough to sit down with and go through 20 iterations with.
Yeah, and we also kind of in this conversation have skipped over, there's in between us, or in between sort of whatever our direction and scripts and stuff, and Igloo was a pre-production team of storyboard artists that we basically had this exact same experience with, but in 2D, where we're going over every scene, every frame, and we worked with a team, or we built that team in Canada. But we got really close to the unit directors, who were kind of the leads of each episode on the storyboard team, and they told us like, you guys are more involved on this than anyone has ever been involved on previous projects, and they're working on Invincible and all this other stuff. And I think the industry's standard is like a director or a writer just turns stuff over, says here's my big ideas, and I'll see you in a couple months where I'll have a couple notes, but then it'll be done. And like it was like a daily, we were meeting with people daily, giving notes all the time. So it might be bad. Like we might be assholes. We might actually be doing this wrong, but and I'm sure, and we've learned a lot. So there's a lot of better, things that we're going to change on the next one. But it kind of just was required to get what you're seeing on screen. So
yeah, and look, the output speaks for itself. You guys sped through, we low-key there sped through something that I like to ask folks on the podcast, which is, who on your team, who doesn't get as much time in the limelight, who do we give a shout out to? I sort of steered us into your animation team, so I do want to just briefly wave at everyone else who worked on Dispatch and go, great job, guys. I'm loving your work. I'm speeding past that question, but acknowledging it, because I want to get to a final, thematic thing about your game that really struck with me, which is this game is exceptionally Los Angeles. Like, I used to live in LA. I lived there for a decade, and I was so literally just tracking where characters were on the map. The apartment in the beginning, I'm looking at that going that's my friend, that could be my friend's apartment. What motivated that choice? I'm really interested in devs who make games set in the places they live or places they have deep fondness of, that they go to that much detail. Well,
all the co-founders at some point has lived in LA. 3 of us currently do. Dennis moved up north. So we, are very familiar with the area. It's a lot easier to kind of write out something and to sort of draw on that. And I think it just Michael and Pierre, 2 of our co-founders, grew up here, so it's something that they have experience. Like, they grew up in San Pedro, which is near Torrance. Torrance started as a joke because we're thinking, let's set it in LA, but let's set it in Torrance. That's hilarious. It's only hilarious if you're from LA. It's not funny to anybody else. So when we found that out, when we hired someone from Torrance, and we were like, oh, isn't it funny? Our game's set in your crappy hometown? And they were like, that's not funny. Like, oh, never mind. It's not funny. You're right. But yeah, Torrance is just where Yeah, it's like Baskin Robbins and like Taekwondo, dojos. Like it's a very simple place.
But that's a lot of places in America, just with different shaped buildings.
Yeah, it's like where I grew up in Northern California is kind of an equivalent of Torrance in LA.
Yeah, Gaithersburg, Maryland for me. Yeah,
because when people hear LA, they think of like Hollywood or downtown LA, and that's basically it. And we visit those places in the game, but then so then it was easy for us to draw, like especially for Pierre, who's a native, like things like, and you haven't been there yet, but there's a bar in episode 5 they go to. That's a real bar in San Pedro, I think. The apartment, Robert's apartment. I mean, it's weird to say. That's literally across from my old apartment. I just literally went across the street, like took a picture as reference. I was like, this is the style of shit we want to like make sure makes it in the game, so LA natives are like, oh man, that's a classic this style apartment. The other reference for that is in Terminator 2. There's a shot where they're in the alleyway and it looks exactly like that. So we're just trying to like pull from things that
well, even like the billboard scene in episode 1, like it's in one of those like classic. It was like the one thing I wanted to make sure to get into is like the weird like 2-story mini mall thing on the corner of a block that are just everywhere.
And all this was made trickier by Igloo because they're from Thailand and they're generating the art. So there's so many revs where we're like, what is not being captured here? It's something, there's an essence missing and we have to kind of help them, because they don't have that.
Yeah, no. And it's funny too, because you're right. It's like that was like 1 step or 2 steps removed. And then also our art director, Derek, who lives up in Northern California and grew up on the East Coast, had never really spent time in the LA suburbs before. And so I think initially a lot of his sort of inspirational drawings that he was doing also didn't feel like LA, kind of felt like Northern California. It was just like, oh, suburby town. And we're like, no. It's very specific. And so he took a trip down, brought his camera for like a few days and just drove around Torrance and all of the connecting areas. And I remember coming back and talking to him and he's like, you don't understand. Everything's connected down there.
No.
You can't tell when one city starts and one ends. And we're like exactly. It's
basically
a unique place.
Yeah. All right. One final question about the LA thing. So episode 1, they leave the bar. Blazer picks Rob up. They go flying. It's this nice scene. It's all going well. They fly over what looks like the Santa Monica Mountains to me. They fly through downtown. And then all of a sudden they're in front of the Hollywood sign. What the hell's going on there?
It's when you said, you're like, I was tracking on a map.
Like,
I'm like, It's one of those things where people like in, Die Hard 3, they're like tracking, they could never get from this part of town to that part of town in that amount of time.
That one, that honestly, I think the actual attempt was that, I think part of what makes it hard is like when you see like they fly through downtown and then you see the Hollywood sign and you see how close it is, then you realize, we must be in Hollywood, not downtown, but that doesn't make sense either. I think the original intent was that Hollywood sign would be really far away in the matte painting, so you could like kind of see like, okay, but like that doesn't read very well, so then we had to just make it bigger, and so it was more of just for like clarity standpoint we changed it. But yes, I knew that people were going to do the math and figure out that we were cheating a little bit, but we tried to get, I mean, they are going from Torrance over the hill into the down, so you at least appreciate that part.
All right, if they're going from Torrance, then I at least need to own up to I got the math wrong there on that mountain set, because it looked like the valley into Torrance to me. But that's because I lived in the valley, which is just that like a different version of the problem we described. Yes, so I just gave you shit about some of that math. I need to own up, and
that's fine.
Yeah, it's all good. Nick, Dennis, this ruled. Your guys' game rules. I'm really happy. I actually didn't get to ask much about it here, but you guys had a good talk with Jason Schreier at Bloomberg. I really I recommend folks go check that out, because the story of what you guys went through to get this game off the ground that is doing so well, that is resonating with people, the story you guys went through and the struggles you guys had, it's really something, and it really speaks to how like crazy the game industry can be in terms of like this game that clearly nothing's ever good until it's done, right? But it was clearly in one state, and the struggles you guys had to read it. Anyway, that's just me praising what you told him, what you told Jason. So I really appreciate what you guys went through. Thanks for taking the time to talk to me today.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah.
Right on. Yeah.
I hope you enjoy the rest of your playthrough.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'll admit to listeners here, I haven't finished it yet. I'm sorry, guys. Only episode 2. Whatever. Thanks for talking.
It's all good.
Thanks, man. Cheers.
Right on. Thank you. Take it easy. Bye.
Thanks again to Nick and Dennis for coming by the Game Developer Podcast. Be sure to check out Dispatch for yourself if you haven't played it yet. It's available now on PC, PlayStation. For more from us at Game Developer, be sure to visit www.gamedeveloper.com. Follow us on major social platforms, and subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find me on Blue Sky at bryantfrancis.me. Today's episode was edited by Pierre Landreau. Our theme music is by Mike Meehan. Thanks for listening, and yeah, maybe I got Torrance and the Valley mixed up. You know why? Because most of the big game studios are in Santa Monica. Checkmate.